The cruelest wounds are never made by strangers. They come from the people who once promised they would never let you fall. Moonlight spilled across the ancient stone courtyard of Silver Hollow Pack, turning polished marble into a sea of pale silver, as nearly 300 wolves gathered beneath towering white pines for the annual mating ceremony. Every heartbeat carried expectation. Every whispered conversation carried judgment. Claire Whitmore stood near the end of the ceremonial line with her hands folded tightly in front of her simple ivory dress, trying to ignore the uneasy silence that always followed wherever she went. At 23, she had learned how to survive invisible. Her wolf was gentle, her voice soft, and while others admired strength above everything else, kindness had never earned respect inside Silver Hollow. Tonight was supposed to change that. Tonight Ethan Blackwood, the future alpha of the pack and the man who had once promised they would build a future together beneath every full moon, would finally acknowledge their bond before everyone. Claire searched the crowd until her eyes found him standing at the center of the raised platform, broad shoulders wrapped in a midnight blue ceremonial cloak embroidered with silver wolves. He looked exactly as he always had. Confident, admired, untouchable. Their eyes met for only a heartbeat before he calmly looked past her as though she had already disappeared. A cold knot tightened inside her chest. Elder Marcus lifted the ancient staff of Moon Oak, and the murmurs faded into complete silence. Ethan stepped forward without hesitation. Instead of reaching for Claire's hand, he extended his arm toward another woman. Isabella Cross emerged from the front row wearing a dazzling white gown that shimmered beneath the moonlight. Gasps rippled through the crowd before they dissolved into excited applause. Claire could barely breathe. Ethan smiled proudly as Isabella accepted his hand. "Strength deserves strength," he declared, his voice carrying across the silent courtyard. "My future Luna will stand beside me because she makes this pack stronger." The word struck harder than any winter wind. He never spoke Claire's name. He didn't have to. Every pair of eyes slowly turned toward her. Some pitied her. Others smirked openly. Someone laughed. Another voice whispered that everyone had known this would happen. Claire lowered her gaze before anyone could see the tears gathering in her eyes. She refused to let them watch them fall. With quiet dignity, she stepped backward through the crowd, unnoticed by the people celebrating the new couple. No one tried to stop her. No one except a solitary man standing beneath the shadow of an old cedar beyond the torchlight. Wrapped in a plain black traveling cloak with his face hidden beneath a lowered hood, he remained perfectly still as Claire walked past. For the briefest moment, she felt an unfamiliar pair of silver eyes follow her into the darkness, calm, watchful, and impossible to forget. Claire did not look back as the voices of celebration faded behind her. The music that had once filled her heart with hope now sounded distant, swallowed by the whispering wind that drifted through the towering pines surrounding Silver Hollow. Each step carried her farther from the only home she had ever known. Yet strangely, the deeper she walked into the moonlit forest, the lighter the weight on her shoulders began to feel. Tears blurred her vision, but she refused to wipe them away. Some pain deserved to be felt completely before it could finally be left behind. Frost covered the narrow trail like powdered crystal, sparkling beneath the full moon. The cold air stung her cheeks, and every breath formed a pale cloud before disappearing into the night. She wrapped her thin shawl tighter around herself, realizing she had left with nothing except the small leather satchel resting against her shoulder. Inside were a worn family photograph, a hand-carved wooden wolf her late father had made when she was a little girl, and enough coins to buy a few meals. It was everything she owned. Hours passed before the lights of Silver Hollow disappeared behind the hills. Claire finally stopped beside a quiet stream where the water reflected the stars like scattered diamonds. She knelt carefully, cupped the icy water in her hands and splashed it across her face. The cold steadied her breathing. Looking into the rippling reflection, she barely recognized the young woman staring back. The frightened Omega who had waited years for someone else to choose her no longer existed. For the first time there was no promise holding her in place, no expectation demanding she remain small enough to fit someone else's future. A quiet determination settled inside her heart. Wherever tomorrow led, it would belong to her alone. As dawn slowly painted the eastern sky with pale shades of gold and lavender, Claire reached the old trading road that connected several neighboring territories. Travelers occasionally passed through with wagons carrying grain, fabrics, and medicine, making the road safer than wandering through the wilderness alone. An elderly merchant noticed her standing near a weathered wooden sign and kindly offered her a ride in exchange for helping organize supplies during the journey. Claire accepted with grateful relief. Over the next several hours she listened more than she spoke as the cheerful merchant shared stories from distant packs. One name surfaced again and again, spoken with equal measures of admiration and caution. Adrian Thorncrest, the Alpha King whose authority stretched farther than any ruler in living memory. Some claimed he had ended decades of conflict simply by appearing at rival borders. Others insisted he rarely smiled and trusted almost no one beyond his closest royal guards. Every story painted him differently, yet one detail never changed. Wherever the Alpha King traveled, entire kingdoms stood still. Claire listened politely but gave little thought to the mysterious ruler. Men like kings belonged to legends, not to ordinary women searching for honest work. By late afternoon the wagon rolled into Ashen Creek, a peaceful village nestled between rolling hills and dense cedar forests, nearly 100 miles from Silver Hollow. It was smaller than Claire expected, filled with stone cottages, flower boxes beneath every window, and children laughing as they chased one another across the town square. No one recognized her. No one whispered about rejection. No one knew the name Ethan. Blackwood. For the first time in years, anonymity felt like freedom. The merchant introduced her to the owner of a cozy roadside bakery, whose elderly baker needed an extra pair of hands after his assistant had recently married and moved away. Claire accepted the modest position without hesitation. The pay was simple, the room above the bakery was small, and every morning began long before sunrise, but each loaf of fresh bread she helped prepare filled the building with warmth that slowly reached places inside her heart she believed had frozen forever. As evening settled over Ashen Creek, Claire stood outside the bakery watching the first snowflakes drift gently from the darkening sky. She smiled softly without realizing it. Far beyond the quiet village, hidden somewhere beneath those same stars, a lone traveler wrapped in a black cloak continued riding toward the mountains, carrying with him the memory of the young Omega who had walked away from heartbreak without begging anyone to stay. 3 peaceful weeks passed in Ashen Creek, and little by little the sharp edges of Claire's old memories began to soften beneath the comforting rhythm of ordinary life. Every morning before sunrise she unlocked the bakery beside Mr. Harold Bennett, kneading warm dough while cinnamon and fresh butter filled the cozy kitchen. Customers greeted one another by name. Children pressed their noses against the display window waiting for sweet rolls, and no one looked at Claire with pity or disappointment. They simply thanked her for warm bread and kind smiles. It was the first place where she felt valued for who she was instead of what rank she carried. One snowy afternoon, after delivering a basket of bread to an elderly widow who lived nearly a mile beyond the village, Claire chose the longer trail home through Cedar Ridge Forest. Fresh snow muffled every sound except the gentle creak of pine branches swaying overhead. Sunlight filtered through the trees in brilliant streaks, making the untouched landscape glow like polished crystal. The silence should have been peaceful, yet something felt strangely unsettled. A flock of birds suddenly burst into the air from somewhere ahead, scattering across the pale winter sky. Claire slowed her steps. Her instincts whispered that someone nearby needed help. She followed a series of faint footprints leading away from the trail until she reached a small clearing where a powerful black horse stood nervously beside a fallen cedar. The magnificent animal wore finely crafted leather tack unlike anything owned by local villagers. It pawed anxiously at the snow but did not flee when Claire approached. Instead, it turned its head toward the opposite side of the clearing as though asking her to look. Beyond the broken tree lay a man resting against a weathered boulder. His dark traveling cloak was dusted with snow, and one gloved hand pressed firmly against his side while his breathing remained slow but controlled. His hood had slipped back just enough to reveal thick dark hair touched by melting snowflakes and striking features that somehow appeared calm despite obvious exhaustion. Claire hesitated only a moment before stepping closer. The stranger slowly lifted his head. Those unmistakable silver eyes met hers once again. For an instant the entire forest seemed to fall silent. She recognized them immediately. They were the same watchful eyes that had quietly followed her departure on the night everything in her life had fallen apart. Neither of them spoke. The stranger simply studied her with quiet surprise before offering the faintest reassuring smile. "It seems fate enjoys unexpected reunions," he said softly. his deep voice carrying a warmth that contrasted with the winter air. Claire blinked in disbelief. "You were at Silver Hollow," she whispered. He inclined his head without denying it. "I was passing through." She glanced around the empty forest. "Are you traveling alone?" "Not by choice," he answered after a brief pause. "The storm separated me from my companions." His calm manner never changed, yet Claire noticed the strain hidden beneath every measured breath. Snow had collected across his shoulders, and the cold alone could become dangerous if he remained outside much longer. She carefully knelt beside him, setting her basket in the snow. "Can you stand?" she asked gently. "With some dignity." "I hope," he replied with a quiet hint of humor that surprised her. Despite everything she had endured over the past month, Claire found herself smiling for the first time since leaving the bakery that morning. She offered her hand without hesitation. After a brief pause, the stranger accepted it. His leather glove felt cold from the winter air, but his grip remained steady and respectful. Neither of them noticed the nearly invisible figures watching from the distant tree line. Hidden among the snow-covered evergreens, several silent riders lowered their spyglasses in visible relief after finally locating the missing traveler. None of them moved forward. Instead, they waited patiently, following the unspoken order they had carried since dawn. No one was to disturb their king until he chose to reveal himself. Claire slipped her shoulder beneath the stranger's arm, surprised by how carefully he shifted his weight to avoid making the walk more difficult for her. He was taller than anyone she had ever met, yet despite his imposing frame, every movement remained measured and composed. The black horse followed quietly behind them without needing a lead, as though it trusted Claire as much as it trusted its master. Snow continued drifting through the cedar branches while the afternoon light slowly faded into the soft blue tones of approaching evening. The walk back to Ashen Creek was slow, nearly 2 miles along the winding forest path, but neither of them seemed eager to break the peaceful silence. After several minutes, the stranger glanced toward the basket still hanging from Claire's free hand. "Your bread will be cold before you return," he observed with an apologetic smile. Claire laughed softly. "Mr. Bennet always says cold bread can be warmed again. People cannot." The stranger studied her expression with quiet curiosity. "You believe that?" "I have to," she answered honestly. "Otherwise I would have stopped believing people deserve second chances a long time ago." For a brief moment, something unreadable flickered across his silver eyes before he looked ahead once more. "Someone disappointed you." Claire smiled faintly without bitterness. "Someone taught me that I should never build my future around another person's opinion." The stranger nodded as though her answer carried far more meaning than the simple words themselves. By the time they reached the edge of the village, twilight had settled across Ashen Creek. Warm lights glowed through cottage windows, and the comforting scent of wood smoke drifted through the crisp winter air. Rather than drawing attention, Claire guided the stranger through the quieter streets until they reached the small room above the bakery where she lived. Mr. Bennet looked up from stacking flour sacks and immediately hurried toward them with concern. Without asking unnecessary questions, the elderly baker offered blankets, hot soup, and the spare guest room he rarely used. The stranger thanked him with genuine respect, earning an approving smile from the old man. Later that evening, Claire carried a steaming bowl of chicken soup upstairs and found the traveler standing beside the frost-covered window instead of resting. He had removed his heavy cloak, revealing simple dark clothing that somehow fit him with quiet elegance despite its travel-worn appearance. He turned as she entered, accepting the bowl with both hands. "You continue helping someone you barely know," he said. "Does that never worry you?" Claire leaned lightly against the doorway. If kindness always waited for certainty, very little kindness would exist. The room fell silent again. Outside, snowflakes drifted lazily beneath the lanterns lining the quiet street. Finally, the stranger spoke. "My name is Adrian." He offered nothing more, no family name, no title, no explanation. Claire smiled warmly. "I am Claire." He already knew. She could see it in the almost invisible curve of his smile, yet he politely pretended this was their proper introduction. They spent the next hour speaking about ordinary things instead of painful memories. Adrian listened far more than he talked. Claire shared stories about the bakery, the cheerful children who visited every morning, and the peaceful life she hoped to build. She noticed that whenever she spoke, he watched her with complete attention, as though every simple dream she described carried unexpected importance. Long after the village had fallen asleep, neither of them noticed the discreet movement beyond the frosted window. Hidden across the narrow street, several cloaked riders maintained their silent watch from the shadows. They had been joined by additional guards during the evening, each wearing the same discreet silver wolf crest concealed beneath dark winter cloaks. No one approached the bakery. No one interrupted the quiet conversation upstairs. They understood their orders perfectly. Until their king chose the moment himself, the entire kingdom would remain invisible around the woman who had unknowingly welcomed the most powerful alpha in the realm into her modest home. The following morning arrived wrapped in quiet snowfall, and the comforting aroma of fresh bread rising from the ovens below. Claire expected Adrien to have continued his journey before dawn, yet when she stepped into the bakery kitchen carrying a basket of flour, she found him already helping Mr. Bennet arrange heavy sacks along the storage shelves. The elderly baker chuckled as though they had been friends for years. "Your guest insists he cannot accept breakfast without earning it," Mr. Bennet said with an amused grin. Adrien glanced toward Claire and offered a modest smile. "Your employer tried to convince me that hospitality required nothing in return." I disagreed. Claire noticed the effortless way he lifted supplies that usually required two people. There was nothing boastful about it. It was simply natural. Another quiet detail that did not fit the story of an ordinary traveler. Throughout the morning, customers wandered in and out of the bakery, never suspecting the identity of the tall stranger politely sweeping snow from the front steps between deliveries. Children laughed as the magnificent black horse waited patiently beside the hitching post, accepting gentle pats from tiny hands without the slightest sign of unease. Even the village dogs remained strangely calm around the animal, as though they instinctively recognized a presence beyond ordinary understanding. By noon, Adrien thanked Mr. Bennet and prepared to leave. Claire walked with him to the edge of the village where the snow-covered road disappeared into rolling white hills. For several moments neither of them spoke. Winter sunlight reflected across the frozen fields, while a light breeze carried the scent of cedar through the air. Finally Adrien turned toward her. "You gave a stranger warmth when you had no reason to trust him," he said quietly. "People often remember kindness long after they forget grand gestures." Claire folded her hands inside her coat pockets against the cold. "I only hope that wherever you are going, someone will do the same for you if you ever need it again." A faint smile touched his face. "Perhaps they already have." Before Claire could answer, the distant sound of approaching horses echoed across the hills. She looked toward the road and watched nearly a dozen riders emerge through the falling snow in perfect formation. Every horse was immaculately groomed. Every rider wore dark cloaks fastened with polished silver clasps shaped like wolves. As they reached Adrien, the entire column halted at once. Without a single spoken command, each rider dismounted simultaneously. Claire stared in stunned silence as every one of them lowered to one knee with heads respectfully bowed. The man leading the escort spoke first. "Your Majesty, the council has awaited your return." Time itself seemed to stop. Claire slowly turned toward Adrien, searching his calm expression for some sign that this was all a misunderstanding. Instead, he removed the plain leather gloves he had worn since she found him in the forest. Beneath one sleeve gleamed an elegant silver crest engraved with the royal seal recognized throughout every northern territory. The stories she had heard from the traveling merchant suddenly rushed back with startling clarity. The feared Alpha King. The ruler whose name inspired reverence wherever it was spoken. Adrien met her astonished gaze with the same gentle warmth she had seen from the beginning. "I wanted you to know me before you knew my title," he said softly. Claire struggled to find words. "You are the Alpha King?" He gave a quiet nod. "King Adrien Thorncrest." The snow continued drifting between them, peaceful and almost dreamlike. Claire instinctively stepped back, uncertain whether she should bow or apologize for every ordinary conversation they had shared. Adrien closed the distance by a single respectful step before she could lower her head. "Please do not change the way you look at me," he said. "During the past 2 days, you treated me as a man instead of a crown. That is rarer than you could ever imagine." Then, before mounting his horse, He reached into his coat and offered her a small silver medallion bearing the royal wolf. "When you are ready," he said, "bring this to Crimson Keep. You will always be welcome there as my honored guest." Claire remained standing on the snowy roadside long after the royal escort disappeared beyond the hills, the silver medallion resting quietly in her gloved hands. The polished wolf crest caught the afternoon light, making it impossible to mistake for an ordinary keepsake. She tucked it carefully inside her coat before returning to the bakery, saying nothing about what had happened. Mr. Bennet noticed the thoughtful expression on her face but respected her silence. Life in Ashen Creek settled back into its familiar rhythm. Every sunrise began with warm ovens, fresh dough, and smiling customers. Yet sometimes when Claire looked toward the distant mountains beyond the village, she found herself wondering whether Adrian had safely reached Crimson Keep, and whether kings ever found moments of peace beneath the weight of an entire kingdom. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, news of the Alpha King's unexpected disappearance and equally unexpected return spread through every northern territory with astonishing speed. Nobles speculated endlessly. Advisors whispered through palace corridors. Merchants repeated exaggerated stories in crowded marketplaces. No one knew where the king had gone or why he had traveled without ceremony. The truth remained known only to Adrian and the handful of royal guards who had silently watched over him in Ashen Creek. Several weeks later, another rumor began moving even faster than the first. Crimson Keep announced that the Alpha King would host the Winter Summit, inviting every major Alpha, Elder, and respected leader across the northern packs to discuss trade, border agreements, and preparations for the coming spring. An invitation from the crown could not be ignored. Inside Silver Hollow, Ethan Blackwood accepted the royal summons with unmistakable pride. Since publicly choosing Isabella during the mating ceremony, he had become even more confident in his growing reputation. Fellow pack members praised his leadership, and he accepted every compliment as though it were already earned. During one evening gathering, a traveling merchant casually mentioned hearing that the Alpha King had recently shown unusual interest in an unnamed Omega from a small village called Ashen Creek. Laughter immediately spread around the room. Ethan leaned comfortably against the great hall fireplace and shook his head with amused disbelief. "The Alpha King has greater responsibilities than collecting forgotten Omegas," he said, smiling as several others chuckled in agreement. "People invent fairy tales whenever they cannot explain ordinary events." Isabella laughed beside him. Perhaps someone simply mistook a servant for royalty. More laughter followed. Ethan lifted his cup with quiet satisfaction. Somewhere in the back of his mind, Claire's name surfaced for only an instant before disappearing just as quickly. As far as he was concerned, she had become part of a chapter already finished. Back in Ashen Creek, Claire remained completely unaware of the conversations unfolding across the territories. Her days continued peacefully until one crisp winter morning when a polished black carriage bearing the royal wolf crest rolled slowly into the village square. Curious neighbors gathered outside their shops as four elegantly dressed royal attendants stepped onto the snow-covered street. The eldest among them approached the bakery with measured dignity and gently knocked on the wooden door. Claire opened it, surprised to find the visitors bowing respectfully before speaking. "Miss Claire Whitmore," the elder attendant said warmly, "by the personal invitation of His Majesty King Adrian Thorncrest, you are requested to attend the Winter Summit at Crimson Keep as an honored guest of the crown." The entire bakery fell silent. Even Mr. Bennet nearly dropped the tray he had been carrying. Claire instinctively reached into her coat pocket where the silver medallion still rested exactly where Adrian had placed it weeks before. Suddenly his final words echoed clearly in her memory. "You will always be welcome there as my honored guest." Looking from the medallion to the waiting carriage outside, Claire realized that the invitation had never been a polite farewell. It had been a promise. The journey to Crimson Keep took 3 days through snow-covered valleys and towering evergreen forests, yet every mile only deepened Claire's uncertainty. The royal attendants treated her with quiet respect, ensuring she remained warm and comfortable throughout the trip, but no one explained why the Alpha King had chosen to invite an ordinary Omega from a small village to one of the most important gatherings in the Northern Territories. Whenever Claire asked gentle questions, the attendant simply smiled and assured her that His Majesty preferred to answer them personally. On the morning of the 4th day, the carriage climbed the final ridge, and Crimson Keep came into view. Claire could not hide her astonishment. The immense fortress rose above the mountains like something from an old legend, its silver towers catching the winter sunlight while countless banners bearing the royal wolf crest fluttered proudly in the crisp wind. The castle walls stretched farther than she could see, and elegant stone bridges connected gardens, courtyards, and grand halls filled with visitors arriving from every corner of the kingdom. As the carriage rolled through the towering front gates, guards saluted respectfully instead of questioning her arrival. Servants welcomed her by name before escorting her to a beautifully prepared guest suite overlooking the snowy gardens. Fresh flowers rested beside the windows despite the winter season, and a carefully selected gown in soft sapphire blue waited neatly arranged upon the bed with a handwritten note. "Welcome to Crimson Keep. We are honored by your presence." Claire gently traced the elegant handwriting before quietly folding the note and placing it inside her satchel. Later that evening, the palace corridors filled with distinguished guests dressed in their finest formal attire. Powerful alphas from dozens of packs gathered beneath glittering crystal chandeliers, while musicians filled the grand hall with graceful melodies. Claire remained inside her room until one of the royal attendants arrived to escort her personally. "His Majesty requests that you join him before the opening ceremony," the attendant said with a warm smile. Claire's heartbeat quickened as she followed through polished marble corridors lined with ancient portraits of kings and queens. Meanwhile, inside the magnificent throne hall, Ethan Blackwood stood confidently beside Isabella, greeting influential leaders with polished charm. He admired the towering architecture, convinced that this summit would strengthen both his reputation and Silver Hollow's influence. Isabella quietly adjusted his formal cloak and smiled. "Imagine what it would be like to live here," she whispered. Ethan looked toward the elevated royal platform where the Alpha King's throne stood waiting beneath banners embroidered in silver and midnight blue. "Only the strongest deserve a place beside that throne," he answered with quiet certainty. Moments later, a royal herald struck the marble floor with an ornate staff. Every conversation immediately ceased. "His Majesty, King Adrian Thorncrest," the herald announced. Every guest rose to their feet as Adrian entered the hall with calm confidence, dressed in a finely tailored black ceremonial coat, adorned with subtle silver embroidery. His presence filled the room without effort, commanding respect through quiet authority rather than intimidation. Ethan bowed deeply along with every other alpha. When he finally lifted his head, he noticed Adrian pause halfway toward the throne instead of continuing forward. The Alpha King turned toward one of the grand entrances where another herald spoke once more. "Honored guest of His Majesty, Miss Claire Whitmore." Ethan's confident expression vanished completely. Claire stepped gracefully into the hall wearing the sapphire gown prepared for her, her simple elegance drawing every eye in the room. She looked nothing like the heartbroken Omega who had quietly left Silver Hollow weeks before. Adrian descended from the royal platform without hesitation and crossed the marble floor toward her. Before the astonished assembly of nobles and alphas, he offered Claire his arm with genuine warmth. She accepted after a brief, respectful hesitation. Together they walked side by side toward the front of the hall while hundreds of guests watched in complete silence. Ethan could only stare as the woman he had dismissed before his entire pack now entered the kingdom's grandest gathering beside the most respected man in the Northern Territories, and for the first time since the night of the mating ceremony, he understood that he had never truly seen Claire at all. The grand banquet continued beneath shimmering crystal chandeliers, yet the conversations that had filled the hall only moments earlier returned in hushed whispers. Noble families, alpha leaders, and royal advisors watched Claire with growing curiosity as she took her place beside King Adrian Thorncrest. She carried herself with quiet grace, never pretending to belong above anyone else, yet somehow her sincerity made her seem more natural within the royal court than many who had spent their entire lives chasing status. Adrian noticed every uncertain glance she cast across the enormous hall. Leaning slightly closer, he spoke in a voice meant only for her. "You do not need to impress anyone here." Claire looked at him with gentle confusion. "Everyone is watching." A faint smile touched his face. "Let them watch. They are learning the difference between appearance and character." His words settled her racing thoughts. Across the room, Ethan Blackwood could no longer hide his disbelief. He had spent weeks dismissing rumors about Claire as foolish gossip, Yet she now stood only a few feet from the most respected ruler in the Northern Territories, speaking with him as naturally as old friends. Isabella quietly slipped her hand around Ethan's arm, sensing his growing distraction. "Do not embarrass yourself," she whispered. "It does not matter why she is here." Ethan nodded, but his eyes never left Claire. Every memory of the mating ceremony returned with painful clarity. He remembered the quiet dignity with which she had walked away while everyone celebrated around him. At the time he had believed she had lost everything. Now he realized she had simply walked toward a future he had never imagined. As the evening progressed, Adrian invited Claire to accompany him through the receiving line where honored guests were introduced to representatives from every major pack. Elder after elder greeted her respectfully after seeing the king's obvious regard for her. Claire answered each introduction with kindness, never speaking arrogantly or seeking attention. Her calm humility quietly won admiration from people who had expected to meet someone very different. Near the close of the reception, Ethan finally gathered enough courage to approach. He paused several feet away before speaking. "Claire." She turned at the sound of her name. For a brief moment, silence settled around the small circle as nearby guests recognized the former Alpha from Silver Hollow. Ethan offered a restrained smile that carried more uncertainty than confidence. "You look happy." Claire returned the smile with genuine politeness. "I am." There was no anger in her voice. No bitterness. Only quiet honesty. Somehow that simple answer unsettled Ethan more deeply than any accusation could have. He lowered his eyes for a moment before speaking again. "I never expected." His words faded, unable to find the ending he wanted. Claire gently rescued him from the awkward silence. "Life rarely follows the path we expect." Ethan nodded slowly. "I misjudged you." Claire held his gaze without resentment. "Perhaps we both needed to leave the past where it belonged." Before Ethan could respond, Adrian approached with calm, unhurried steps. He did not interrupt or speak sharply. Instead, he simply came to stand beside Claire. His presence alone carried quiet authority that naturally drew respectful space around them. Adrian looked toward Ethan with composed courtesy. "Miss Whitmore has been an invaluable guest of the crown," he said warmly. "Her kindness has reminded many of us that true strength is measured by the way we treat others when no one is watching." Ethan understood the deeper meaning immediately. Adrian had not spoken to humiliate him. He had simply honored Claire's character in front of everyone present. That truth weighed heavier than any public criticism ever could. Ethan inclined his head respectfully toward them both. "I wish you every happiness," he said sincerely before stepping away. Claire watched him disappear into the crowd without satisfaction or regret. The chapter that had once defined her life quietly closed inside her heart. Beside her, Adrian noticed the peaceful expression on her face and smiled almost imperceptibly. Some victories required no applause. They arrived silently. In the moment a wounded heart finally discovered it no longer carried the weight of yesterday. The morning after the winter summit dawned clear and bright, and fresh snow covered the royal gardens like a blanket of untouched white silk. Claire stood quietly on a stone terrace overlooking the mountains, watching the first rays of sunlight paint the distant peaks in shades of gold. She still found it difficult to believe that only a few months earlier she had walked away from Silver Hollow with nothing but a small satchel and a broken heart. The sound of measured footsteps drew her attention. Adrian approached without ceremony, dressed in a simple dark coat instead of his royal robes. Away from the crowded halls and formal traditions, he looked less like a king and more like the thoughtful traveler she had first met beneath the cedar trees. He stopped beside her and admired the peaceful view before speaking. "Do you know why I invited you here?" Claire smiled gently. "I thought perhaps you wished to thank me for helping you." Adrian shook his head with quiet warmth. "I could have done that with a letter." He turned toward her, his silver eyes reflecting the morning light. "I invited you because this kingdom has enough people who admire power. It needs more people who remind us why power exists in the first place." Claire lowered her gaze, touched by words she had never expected to hear. Adrian continued softly. "When everyone believed you had nothing to offer, you still chose kindness. When you thought I was an ordinary traveler, you offered help without asking for anything in return. Character like yours cannot be taught by titles or inherited through noble blood. He reached into his coat and carefully removed a finely crafted silver brooch shaped like the royal wolf surrounded by laurel branches. It was not a crown, nor a symbol of ownership, but the highest civilian honor ever bestowed by the crown. Before the quiet witnesses of the royal council gathered nearby, Adrian presented the brooch with both hands. Claire Whitmore, I ask you to accept this place beside our court as royal ambassador of compassion, so every village in these territories may know that kindness deserves the same respect as strength. The council members bowed their heads in unanimous approval. Claire accepted the brooch with trembling hands, her eyes shining with grateful emotion. She had not been chosen because of beauty, rank, or ambition. She had been recognized for the quiet goodness she carried even when no one was watching. Across the courtyard, Ethan prepared to depart with the Silver Hollow delegation. Before climbing into his carriage, he glanced back one final time. He saw Claire standing confidently beside Adrian, not above others, but among people who valued the heart she had always possessed. At last he understood that the greatest mistake of his life had not been choosing someone else. It had been failing to recognize the extraordinary woman who had stood beside him all along. As the royal banners lifted gently in the winter breeze and church bells echoed across Crimson Keep, Claire looked toward the endless mountains ahead. Her future had never begun on the day someone chose her. It had begun the moment she found the courage to keep walking after rejection. And sometimes the greatest destiny does not arrive to reward a wounded heart. It arrives to reveal the strength that was quietly growing inside it all along.